Thank you, Madam President. I'm here on the floor this afternoon to talk about a young man named Billy Smolinski and a law that Senator Hoeven and I are introducing on behalf of him, his family, and the quite literally millions of other families throughout the United States who have had to deal with the trauma, the angst, the grief of a loved one gone missing. Let me begin by telling you a little bit about Billy Smolinski. Billy's parents don't think that he's alive any longer, but they aren't sure because on August 24th, 2004, at the age of 31, Billy went missing. Now, Billy was a vibrant young man who lived in Waterbury, Connecticut, along with his treasured dog, and he didn't respond to calls and communications from his family over the course of a number of days. And his parents, and I'll speak about his mother in particular, Jan Smolinski, who has been the driving force behind Billy's law. His parents went to law enforcement at the Waterbury Police Department. Now, the Waterbury Police Department is a great police department. I have a lot of friends there, but even they will admit that they really screwed this case up from the beginning. They told his parents that he probably didn't go missing, that he was just running away from personal problems that he had. One officer stated that Billy was probably, quote, drinking a beer in Europe somewhere. The Smolinskis pressed their case over and over, day after day, and only after 2 weeks of asking for help from the police department did the Smolinskis finally get an investigation started. But it went slowly. DNA samples were submitted and lost. It took 4 years before the police department ever actually searched his car to see if there was any information about what happened to Billy. Billy's case has made a lot of news in Connecticut and in Waterbury, and over the course of the last few years, it's taken twists and turns, but he's never been found. His parents suspect he was killed, but law enforcement hasn't made progress on that potential case either. But what Billy's parents found over the course of the last 11 years, as they've tried to aid in the search for Billy, is that they encountered obstacle after obstacle trying to participate in the investigation, to try to be helpful in the search for Billy Smolinski. And they came to me at the time, their member of Congress from Waterbury, Connecticut, to discuss ways in which we here in Washington could take down some of the barriers that they faced. Because what they found as they became reluctantly part of this big national network of families who have had loved ones go missing is that their story was not unique. Their story about finding obstacles at the local police department, but then finding obstacles nationally as they tried to figure out what happened to Billy was all too common. And what they got connected into was a national network of tens of thousands of individuals who are searching for a missing loved one, a missing father or mother, brother or sister. There are nationwide as many as 90,000 active missing persons cases at any given time. And there are some really simple things that we can do to help families who are trying to find their missing loved one. Now, much of the attention rightly goes to missing children. Missing children have an entire set of laws built up around them. And for good reason, our priority lies in finding them. Law enforcement, within a matter of hours, has to post information about missing children onto national databases. There are specific campaigns waged on billboards and media outlets to immediately find missing children. But our focus on finding missing children shouldn't absolve us from the responsibility to help families like the Smolinskis find missing adults as well. And so Senator Hoeven and I have gotten together on a fairly simple piece of legislation, and I want to talk about it here today. A companion piece of legislation is being introduced in the House by my colleague in Connecticut, Representative Elizabeth Esty, and Congressman Ted Poe of Texas. So let me explain what this piece of legislation does. Here's what it does at the foundation. It strengthens the database system that families access to try to find their missing loved one. Currently, there are two databases. One, a law enforcement database, something called NCIC, and second, a public-facing database called NamUs. Now, these two databases very often aren't talking to each other, and therein lies the primary problem that this bill tries to solve. Law enforcement uploads all sorts of information onto NCIC, but then that data often doesn't get transferred over to the database that the families can access, which is called the NamUs database. Now, why is that important? It's important because families are the super sleuths in missing persons cases. Families are the ones that know all of the detailed, intricate information about the circumstances of a disappearance and the identification of their loved one. So I don't mean to get too gruesome, but think about this statistic. There are 40,000 sets of unidentified remains in the country today. Think about that. There are 40,000 sets of unidentified remains in the country. But because not all of that information, the detailed descriptions of those remains, are uploaded onto a database that the public can see, Billy's body may be out there somewhere, but his parents can't find it because they don't have access to the information. Unfortunately, that's the reality, the problem that we're trying to solve. If you get more information that law enforcement has onto a public database, the super sleuths, the parents, the brothers, the sisters will have more access to it. What about information that law enforcement has about a individual who's gone missing? A report of someone that's gone missing in California not uploaded onto a database that a family who's looking for that information in New York may want. This legislation authorizes NamUs permanently in law and then requires that the two databases be connected. Now, law enforcement rightly has a concern that any information that is sensitive to an open case should remain private, and this legislation allows for the FBI to determine what information has to remain private as part of NCIC and what information goes onto the public database. But connecting those databases will give more information to families like the Smolinskis to try to crack these 90,000 cases that are out there today. Second, the legislation opens up a relatively modest but important training program for police, for coroners, for medical examiners to make sure that they're using these databases, that they're putting this information up and putting it online. The databases don't work if you're not getting information uploaded. If you're not getting the data out of a coroner's office up onto the database, there's no way that a family across the country can access it to try to find the final resting place of their loved one. And so this legislation authorizes a small new program that would provide training to those medical examiners, coroners, police departments to try to make sure that information is getting up on the law enforcement database, NCIC. Remember, they put up all the information about missing kids right away, but as you heard in the case of Billy Smolinski, often they don't put that information up about missing adults. Some of these police departments are tiny. They don't have the resources to do training for their personnel on how to do this. This program would allow them to get that. And in the end, we can crack a lot of these cases, thousands of these cases, if we are simply giving some tools to families to participate in the search and tools to law enforcement to talk with each other. The Smolinskis haven't given up. Jan has come down to Congress to testify on behalf of Billy's Law. She's changed the practices of the Waterbury Police Department. She's even gotten laws passed in Hartford to make sure that other departments don't make the same mistakes. But she wants to make sure that those mistakes aren't repeated across the country. She thinks about what would have happened if that information about Billy had been uploaded onto NCIC immediately, the day that she reported it. Maybe Billy was taken to some other state. Maybe the lack of that information being transmitted that day meant that a break in the case didn't happen in those early days. And she always thinks about what would happen if she had access to more information, if that database that she looks at virtually every day, the NamUs database, had more information about missing persons and about unidentified remains. She thinks about her ability to solve this case, help the police solve this case if those databases were better, were more up to date. And so in Connecticut, we hope that we are eventually going to solve the case of Billy Smolinski's disappearance. But we also hope that we can pass legislation here in the House, bipartisan, non-controversial, measured, common sense, that will assure that there are just less Jan Smolinskis in the world going forward. We passed this in the House when I was there with a broad, big bipartisan vote. This is the first time we've introduced it on a bipartisan basis here in the Senate. And I'm hopeful, speaking on behalf of not just the Smolinski family, but the 90,000 other families who are grieving for missing persons, that we can get this done shortly, so that we can give families and law enforcement the tools they need to crack more of these cases. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.